So I procrastinated this week. My plan was to get everything ready and even record my video before today because I knew I had to work today and tomorrow, and my plan was to get it done beforehand. But here I am at work. I've been working on it most of the day, so here we go today. And don't mind, I don't have makeup, hair's not really done. It's just me. So today we're talking about chapter 1 of Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, entitled Scarcity, Looking Inside Our Culture of Never Enough. I had to look up the definition of narcissist because though I believed I had a good grasp on the term, it has become something I hear a lot. People are forever talking about narcissist. So I looked it up. The Oxford Dictionary's definition of a narcissist is a person who has an excessive interest in or admiration of themselves. It meant what I thought it meant. It did. But you can't go wrong researching things to not spread misinformation or to help educate yourselves and others. I'm reading from my laptop because I'm at work. I don't have the best setup, so just bear with me this week. Brene Brown writes, quote, while lay people are using narcissism as a catch-all diagnosis for everything from arrogance to rude behavior, researchers and helping professionals are testing the concept's elasticity in every way imaginable, end quote. I've thought and had discussions with others about how I feel like as a society we seem to need a diagnosis for everything these days. The younger generations seem to want to label all behavior, from narcissistic to neurodivergent in whatever way it may be. There seems to be a need to label. Not that labeling is wrong or you don't need a diagnosis if you need a diagnosis. It just seems to be rampant and they're not getting appropriate diagnoses. They are self-diagnosing or diagnosing other people, and it's not okay. Anyway, so there are terms out there that I didn't know existed. I remember one of the first times I heard the term oppositional defiance disorder, or ODD. My first thought was that was ODD, not ADD. My first thought was, so they're just a brat. I was not brought up to get a diagnosis for all behaviors. I was taught consequences, either good or bad, depending on the behaviors. I feel like we're seeing more and more diagnoses to justify behaviors as opposed to educating and understanding. Educating both yourself and the people around you and understanding not everyone is the same. I am in no way a mental health professional. This is just my opinion from things I observe. For those of you who are baby boomers or Gen Xers, probably even before that, remember how much we dismissed those mom groups who said that our music was of the devil and we were all evil for what we listened to. Remember that? Remember those? Also, how said music was going to result in us all being criminals. While I don't think that is generally the case, it appears there may be some current research that indicates music, specifically hit songs over the past 3 decades, have become more negative, angry, and self-absorbed. Of course, I'm paraphrasing, but that seems to be the case. Sunshine and Rainbows were definitely not the focus of the songs I listened to in my youth, or even the songs that I listen to today when I'm looking to get fired up. As an adult, seeing the prevalence of violence, anger, hate, and self-importance in the mainstream, now I can relate to those moms. Kind of. Sorry. That may be a conversation for another day. Back to the book. Apparently, this research has shown that narcissistic personality disorder diagnoses have more than doubled in the last decade. In the book, the following questions were asked. Quote, have we turned into a culture of self-absorbed, grandiose people who are only interested in power, success, beauty, and being special? Are we so entitled that we actually believe that we're superior even when we're not really contributing or achieving anything of value? Is it true that we lack the necessary empathy to be compassionate and connected people? End quote. Hell yes. Hell yes. I believe that this is very much a problem. I would not go so far as to say all of those apply to all people, because that's not true. I do believe that we live in a very self-absorbed society. It seems to be getting worse. This book was first printed in 2012. I think much has changed since then, and definitely not for the better. As far as those questions go, I also see music specifically, but also other forms of mainstream entertainment can contribute to narcissistic behaviors. Can we turn things around? My go-to reaction to a narcissist is, as Brene Brown says, to cut them down to size. What I have learned, not only from this book, but from life experiences, this doesn't really work. Why? Because, to paraphrase Brene Brown, behaviors related to narcissism, grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy is underpinned in shame. End quote. So, insulting or cutting them down to size doesn't help. It just breeds more shame. I'm a firm believer in consequences for our actions and not using a diagnosis as a way to justify behavior. I find that's just how I am excuse infuriating, though I've probably used it in the past. I also believe in educating. I believe people are capable of change, and I know I am a work in progress. Getting to the core of behaviors is important, even though it's very difficult. While I don't believe I'm a narcissist, I mean, nobody does, I do often lack empathy. When I have behavior that lacks empathy, or I know I've responded in a negative way, I often go back to reflect on it a lot. Think about what I could have done better and how my response or behavior may have affected other people. I expect the same from others, which is probably not fair. Expectations generally lead to disappointment. Here's something I struggle with: not shaming others. It's a terrible thing to struggle with. I don't generally go into things with the thought of I'm going to shame them to make them act right, at least not consciously. It is an ingrained behavior or knee-jerk reaction. I often don't know I'm doing it. Then I will over-explain sometimes because I am in shame over my shaming. It's a vicious cycle. My tone and facial expressions often betray me, even though my thought process is not actually to shame. I wonder if there's a diagnosis for that besides RBF. Kidding. I know much of this is learned behavior. Being shamed a lot growing up, being shamed in school, being shamed in my chosen profession. I work EMS, and let me tell you, shame was definitely rampant early in my career, and some will still argue it's very much present today in many workplaces. I've been on all ends of it. None of it felt good. I take no joy in being shamed or in shaming others. It's a work in progress. Actually, I think I shamed someone recently for not knowing what I thought they should know. Damn. I did apologize, though not properly. Something I need to work on. Anyway, I have read the same 2 pages over and over, while listening to them on the audiobook. Safe to say I'm having some issues absorbing this concept. What I think is being said on page 22 and 23 is that a lot of the behaviors we may be seeing are based on shame and the fear of being ordinary. This makes sense in a society where self-worth can be measured by online presence, acceptance, likes, and the overwhelming need to be like celebrities. Many people feel lesser than others. This can breed shame, which breeds the need to drag others down and or boast about ourselves just to feel better. It makes me wonder about the things we are seeing now. So my feeds on most of my social media are people who are positive, people I admire due to what they do to build others up. I don't watch shows about famous families or other reality TV shows. But if I'm being real honest, those positive people I follow, I do feel inadequate in many ways when I watch them. But it makes me want to do better. I'm sorry, my body's making all kinds of noises. It's like I need to burp, but it's not going anywhere. Sorry. So, my answers to the questions on page 23, y'all, I'm struggling, 23 and 24 are this. I believe the messages that define our culture are: you must be thin, beautiful, flawless, perfect, straight, very white teeth, one of my biggest insecurities, and have a lot of money to buy all the stuff. The expectations that I see other people have are that this just comes to you. You don't have to work for it, it just happens. I think this expectation is something not only fueled by media, reality TV, etc., but also by those of us that are parents to those upcoming generations. The idea of I will give my kids what I never had seems to have spun out of control. Not only are they given what we never had, but have never learned the valuable lessons that we learned. I think we can learn a lot through adversity, and with lack of adversity and abundance of getting what you want, valuable lessons aren't learned. When you meet people in their 20s that don't know how to sweep and mop a floor, when they just expect everything to be given to them because it always has been, when they don't have to do chores or work for anything, the end result is a culture of I need more and everyone should just give it to me. Also, the hustle culture, which is great for people who hustle, meaning work hard and earn what they want. For some people, however, hustle means to fraud or swindle people out of their hard-earned money. We are seeing more and more of this. I think we're also seeing a surge in hate, violence, and my struggles are worse than yours, so I'm entitled to such and such. The second question is tougher for me to answer. It requires a little deeper thought. Though I think I addressed it a little above, our struggles give us valuable life lessons. People in the same family can have different experiences. So say the oldest child lived with her or their parents through a time when they were struggling with money, alcohol, and or drugs. The child ends up avoiding those things for a very long time throughout their teen years and through most of adulthood. Even when they do consume alcohol, it's with the idea of how they are affecting others when they drink and the consequences of that. The youngest, who did not live through those things, however, heard stories about them from a point of view that didn't show the negatives, but what may be perceived as fun. They end up struggling with addiction and other issues. Also, where the oldest's behavior was shamed, ridiculed, or punished, the youngest behaviors were labeled and justified through the labeling. Neither of these options are great, though both can have its merits. I find there are people who are bound and determined to learn through their own mistakes because they don't value other people's opinions. In this case, the oldest learned through other people's behaviors and the youngest learned through her own. They both learned. In the case of the youngest, has always been more outgoing and willing to take risks. The oldest is more quiet, snippy, bossy, and has not taken many risks as a means of protecting themselves. Final question. So hard because it asks about our behaviors, thoughts, and emotions It asks about how our behaviors, thoughts, and emotions are related to vulnerability and the need for a strong sense of worthiness. I hate everything about that question. Everything. All the words. Vulnerability and having a sense of worthiness have always been a struggle for me. When I feel vulnerable, my behavior tends to really plummet. I get really upset or angry. I cry. I may yell, get snippy. I get quiet. I shame people that shouldn't be shamed. Remember earlier when I said I had shamed someone for not knowing something I thought they should know? What I didn't mention was I was one of their teachers. Not their only teacher, but still there's a sense of responsibility and shame for them not knowing things. My response was asking if they even read their book. Ugh. Just add that to my list of my not greatest hits. The little gremlins or tapes that play in our minds affect our emotions, which can affect our behavior. So what if we looked at narcissism through the lens of vulnerability? See, I can't even say it. It's such a struggle for me. If we look at the bigger picture or a greater lens, how much is scarcity, quote, affecting how we live, love, work, lead, parent, govern, teach, and connect with one another, end quote. Do you believe it is playing a big role in our current culture? I believe it does. My tapes through the never blink enough lens. I am never good enough, never thin enough, never successful enough, never smart enough, never certain enough, never safe enough. Others that come to mind that she had not listed there that I struggle with are never funny enough, never loving enough, never joyful enough, just never enough. So, how have we gotten to this place of scarcity as a culture or society? I believe media plays a huge role. Comparison plays a huge role. How many of us compare ourselves to the people around us, friends, family, neighbors, and strangers, to the people on the TV? I don't know their story, but I am certain they are way better than me. Trauma can play a role in scarcity. Since this book was written in 2012, the referenced events such as 9/11 that shaped where our culture was at that time and traumatic events that happened in the decade prior. What about the decade since? What about even the last 3 years? Think about the trauma we have seen. We've lived through a global pandemic, which we are still feeling the effects of, and it's still out there. And all the things related to that. Some lost their jobs, some worked way too much. Healthcare providers. We have seen huge changes and shifts in how things are done. Many families had long periods of time they couldn't see their loved ones. Many had loved ones they lost that they weren't able to go see. We have seen a huge increase in school and other mass shootings. Even those of us who aren't directly affected can feel the pain and shame. Whenever these shootings happen, we inevitably get the immediate shaming of people who think differently from us when it comes to gun control. Suddenly it becomes every gun owner's fault, even though the vast majority of people who own guns aren't the problem. The environment, politics, race, color, national origin, sexual orientation, all of these have worsened as shame triggers as social media becomes embedded in our daily lives and people feel the need to shame anyone who thinks differently. Quote, worrying about scarcity in our culture's version of post-traumatic stress. It happens when we've been through too much, and rather than coming together to heal, requires vulnerability. We're angry and scared and at each other's throats, end quote. Sorry, I didn't read that very well. But wow, she nailed it. It's gotten even worse. Though we need to come together more than ever, I can say I've seen, quote, shame, comparison, and disengagement, end quote, in work and home cultures. We won't even mention the politics and other areas. That's all a mess. I am sure there are other places that these play a huge role that other people can relate to. I'm going to focus on work and home because those are the two main focuses of my life. I'm not going to speak about world culture right now. On page 28, there are 3 questions she asks. I'm not going to read them because this is already super long. I am going to answer for work and home. Just in general, in my current situation, I would say yes and no on all 3 of them. At my level at work, I don't feel that any of those are big issues. I think we have a pretty good team where I work. It always requires work and effort to stay that way. In my past work lives, definitely all 3 were an issue. At home, it's a constant effort to manage my own personality, if you will, to keep growing. I can work on my things and attempt to help people through theirs, but sometimes all of these create issues. They can all 3 of those things can create issues in my life. I try. I make a conscious effort, but sometimes it becomes a problem. I am working on being more vulnerable with my family and close friends. I am working on being wholehearted. It's tough. I know I have to play my role in creating a setting in which I can be vulnerable and others can be vulnerable with me. No aspect of the questions she asks on page 28 creates an environment that cultivates that. I can't control others. I can only change myself and hope I can affect positive change in others. It's a tough time for that right now. It's also a tough time. It's also a time that we need it most. We all need to come together. I need to be mindful of how I engage. So that's all I can control. Basically sums up my feelings and thoughts on chapter 1. Again, I'm not reviewing the book. I'm not in any way affiliated with Brene Brown or her publishing company or anything like that. This is just something that I'm doing, going through the book chapter by chapter. Since this book was first published in 2012, just 10 years ago, so much has changed. I believe we are reaping the consequences of a scarcity culture. The question is, how do we turn it around? What role will I play? This is it for chapter 1. Next week we will discuss chapter 2, debunking the vulnerability myths. Y'all have a great day.